The party was alive with music, laughter, and the faint hum of meaningless conversations that filled the room like static. She stood by the drink table, fingers wrapped loosely around a glass of soda he had barely touched, watching everyone else melt into the chaos. Bright, colorful lights flashed across faces he recognized but hardly cared to name, friends of friends, acquaintances from work, and her boyfriend, Aaron, who was locked in a heated debate over sports stats with a group of guys by the balcony. Typical Aaron. He was steady, reliable, and endlessly predictable. The kind of boyfriend who always texted good morning, who held doors open, who planned their weekends 2 weeks in advance. He knew every inch of him, from the dimple in his left cheek to the way he drummed his fingers against his knee when bored. He was safe, a trait that felt comforting at first but now gnawed at his making his itch for something he couldn't name. Bored? The voice came from behind her, smooth and uninvited. He turned, her breath catching slightly before he could stop it. He stood there, tall, with a presence that felt both casual and predatory, like a wolf lounging just out of reach. He wasn't from their usual crowd. His clothes were sharper, his demeanor looser. Where Aaron's presence faded comfortably into the background, this stranger's energy disrupted the air itself. "I'm fine," he replied, though her tone sounded defensive even to her own ears. He smirked as though he'd already figured her out, which infuriated her. "Sure you are." His gaze lingered, taking her in without a hint of shame, as if it were his right. He shifted uncomfortably but couldn't bring herself to walk away. "You don't belong here," he said finally, like it was an observation, not an insult. He frowned, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "Don't get me wrong," he continued, hands sliding casually into his pockets. "You fit the picture, polite smile, good boy vibes. But you don't belong here. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." He was too close now, though the room buzzed with enough noise to mask their conversation from prying ears. She bristled, searching for something sharp to say, but the words stuck in her throat. Maybe because he wasn't entirely wrong. "And you do," she shot back finally, regaining some footing. "Not even a little," he said with a small laugh, though there was no real humor in it. "But I don't lie about it." There it was again, that knowing tone, like he could see things she hadn't said out loud. Before she could reply, someone called her name. Aaron, waving her over from across the room, smiling like always. "Dependable, good Aaron." "You should go," the stranger said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Wouldn't want to keep him waiting." He stepped back, giving her space, but his presence lingered. As she moved toward Aaron, she felt it, like a thread had been tied around her wrist, tugging his ever so slightly in the opposite direction. He didn't even know his name. And yet, her pulse wouldn't slow. The forest seemed to close in as they ran, branches clawing at Alex's face, roots reaching to trip him feet. Michael's ragged breaths chased her through the thick, suffocating air, a frantic counterpoint to her pounding heart. "Keep going," he shouted over her shoulder, him voice hoarse, but she didn't dare slow. The dragging sound was back, closer now, heavier, as though whatever was behind them was gaining confidence, pulling itself through the underbrush with a grotesque deliberation. Michael stumbled again, and this time Alex heard him hit the ground. She stopped, spinning around to see him pushing himself up on trembling arms, his face slick with sweat. I can't." "You can," he growled, rushing to him and hauling him up by his jacket. He could see the terror in his eyes, a raw, wild thing. He was breaking apart, but there was no time to put him back together. "Move." The dragging sound slowed, as though the thing was savoring its pursuit. Alex risked a glance behind them. It was closer now, close enough that the fractured figure took shape in the dimming light. Its limbs were impossibly long, arms dangling, the head lolling as if barely attached. It stepped into a slanting beam of sunlight, and for a terrible moment, she saw it clearly. Its face, or what passed for one, was smooth and featureless, skin stretched too tightly over its skull. But something moved beneath the surface, rippling like insects caught under glass. Alex's stomach lurched. Michael saw it too. "No," he whimpered, his knees buckling again. "No, no, no. Run," Alex screamed. He didn't wait for him to answer this time. He grabbed his arm, yanking him forward as they stumbled through the trees. Ahead, the light was brighter now, an opening. It felt impossibly far away, but she focused on it, ignoring the burn in her lungs, the aching stitch in his side. Behind them, the dragging grew louder, punctuated now by a grotesque clicking noise. "Don't stop," she panted, more to herself than Michael. Almost there. The opening was maybe 20 feet away when Michael wrenched free of her grip. "Wait," he gasped. "Alex, listen." He faltered, stumbling to a stop. The dragging sound had stopped. The forest was eerily silent. Michael's face was slack with confusion as he turned, looking behind them. "It's gone?" Alex didn't trust it. The forest felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. The faint light of the clearing beckoned, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something waited for them there, too. "Michael," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's not gone." But Michael didn't move. His gaze fixed on something over her shoulder, his face draining of color. Alex turned slowly. The figure was there, standing not 10 feet away, still and silent. Its head tilted as though it were studying them, and then, with a slow, deliberate step, it began to move forward again. This time, Alex didn't look back. He ran, Michael's scream ringing in his ears. The kiss and moment of betrayal. The garden was silent, save for the whisper of wind through the rosebushes and the restless shift of shadows beneath the pale moonlight. Ariel lingered by the marble fountain, him breath coming in shallow pulls, his gaze fixed on the path he knew he would take. Each second sharpened him anticipation into something almost painful. He should not have come. He knew this, and yet here he stood, him gloved fingers tracing the lace hem of her cloak as if the motion could steady her. A twig snapped. She turned sharply. Then, he emerged. Lucian moved with the casual grace of someone who belonged nowhere yet made every space his own. His dark coat melted into the night, but the silver at his cuffs and the glint of his hair under moonlight betrayed him. "You came," he said softly as if surprised. "And you're late," Ariel replied, the words clipped, though her voice betrayed no anger. "Had to be careful." Lucian closed the distance between them, his footsteps unnaturally quiet. When he stopped, he was close enough for her to see the hollows beneath his cheekbones, the faint scar cutting across his jaw. Dangerous features on a man with dangerous intentions. "And the others?" he pressed. He shook his head. "No one followed me. Trust me." Trust. A bitter word. Ariel searched his face, but Lucian's expression was a mask, stone smooth, eyes unreadable. He should have recoiled from him. Instead, he let his guard lower by inches, like a door left slightly ajar. "You've brought what I asked for?" Lucian's voice dipped lower, all silken urgency. Ariel hesitated, pulling a small velvet pouch from beneath his cloak. "Proof of loyalty." He offered it, but her hand hovered just beyond his reach. "After this, I need your word." "And you have it," Lucian replied. He took the pouch carefully, his gloved fingers brushing him. The touch lingered, unnecessary, deliberate. For a breathless beat, neither moved. Ariel's heart betrayed his, thudding wildly. When Lucian finally spoke again, his tone softened. "You don't have to keep this weight on your shoulders. You could leave. Come with me." "You know I can't." "Then what do you want?" Lucian asked, the words barely above a murmur. Ariel hesitated. "I want to believe you." Lucian smiled, sad and fleeting. Before he could think, his hand cupped her jaw, drawing him forward. He allowed it. Perhaps he craved it, this escape, this betrayal of her better judgment. Their lips met, and the kiss was anything but tender. It was a battle, fierce and consuming, a single act that dismantled her carefully built walls. When they pulled apart, Ariel's breath shook. Lucian leaned close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "Forgive me." The dagger struck before she could react, swift, sharp, buried between her ribs. A cold rush flooded her chest. His eyes widened in disbelief as she staggered backward. Lucian's face hardened, devoid of tenderness now. "Your loyalty was always going to cost you." Ariel crumpled to the ground as darkness swept in, carrying with it the truth of her folly. The rain had not stopped for hours. Aiden pressed his forehead against the cracked windowpane of the abandoned cottage, staring into the sheet of gray that veiled the forest. His hands trembled, though not from the cold. Behind him, Rowan paced, his boots scuffing the dusty wooden floor. "This was your plan, wasn't it?" Rowan's voice was low but sharp, cutting through the hollow silence. Aiden didn't turn. "It was supposed to work." "Supposed to?" "We don't have room for mistakes, Aiden. Not with him out there." At that, Aiden turned to face him. The firelight cast jagged shadows on Rowan's face, illuminating him anger, him fear. He was right, of course. The man they were running from, the collector, left no survivors. They had gambled everything on a single escape route, a hidden path through the valley. Now the bridge lay splintered and washed away, carried off by the floodwaters below. Aiden exhaled sharply, his mind racing to calculate what remained. "We wait here for a few hours. The rain will slow." "It won't," Rowan interrupted, her green eyes fierce. "You've seen the storm. He'll be here before the river subsides. And when he finds us—" The sentence hung in the air like an unspoken curse. Rowan turned away, arms crossed tightly over her chest, his breath ragged. For the first time since they'd escaped, Aiden let himself see him exhaustion. Her coat was soaked through, him usually steady hands clenched into fists. Him determination had carried them this far, but even he was breaking under the weight of the inevitable. "This isn't over," Aiden said, stepping closer. "We can still make it to Ashcroft." "How?" Rowan whirled to face him, her frustration boiling over. "You think we can just walk through the valley? The collector's men are everywhere. And you can't even—" He stopped, biting him lip. Aiden stiffened. "What? You can't fight him?" His voice softened. "You know it as well as I do. He's faster. Stronger. If we're caught—" "I won't let us be caught." Rowan laughed bitterly, a sound so hollow it made Aiden flinch. "You think promises will keep him away?" Aiden looked at her for a long moment, searching for something. Hope, trust, anything. Instead, he saw the truth reflected back at him. The same truth that had haunted his nightmares since the night they'd fled. The collector was stronger, and they were running out of time. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows like an omen. Aiden turned toward the fire, the flickering light blurring his vision as doubt gripped him. Rowan dropped into a chair with a sigh, the fight seemingly gone from him. "We'll rest for a bit," he said quietly, though he knew she wouldn't believe it. "We'll find a way." Silence swallowed the room. Outside, the rain fell harder, each drop a drumbeat counting down to something unseen, yet inescapable. And in that moment, Aiden knew the truth. The bridge hadn't just been a casualty of the storm, it had been a choice. One final path severed, forcing them to confront what they had been running from all along. The collector was coming, and there was nowhere left to run.